I want to show you all the evidence that not only God exists, but that he created the world, the universe. I want to show you evidence that atheism and evolution are not true, that they're the myths, that reason is not found in them, that they're illogical. We're going to study many facts that prove that the Bible is from God, that it really is God's word, that was inspired by God, that it's completely unique in literature because it was inspired by God, and that is the reason we can rely on it. That is the reason we can trust it. There are a lot of people that wonder whether or not Jesus really did exist. We're going to give evidence in this class that Jesus really did exist in history, and not only was he a historical figure, but that he really was who he claimed to be, deity. So be thinking about that as we get into this class over the next few weeks. Now, what I want to do tonight is start this series of lessons that really will dive deep into Christian evidences by talking about the problem that faces us when we're trying to present the evidence that our belief is real, and that is the lack of faith, the problem of unbelief. So I'm going to pull something back up for you all to see. The world that we're living in, as a whole, it's losing more and more of her faith in God. Would you all agree with that? That there are more people in this generation that are at best skeptical and agnostic, and at worst just completely do not believe in God at all. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
How have you all had any encounters with atheists or agnostics? Any sort of conversations with them in which they shared with you why they believe that there is no God, or they're not sure if there is a God?
Yes.
What, Jake, if you don't mind, what did they talk about? What were their reasons why they said that they did not have faith?
One reason, which you've already alluded to, was they believe that there is no logical, conclusive evidence to support belief in the Creator. And the other reason I've come across is people say that because evil things happen to other people in the world, therefore there is no God.
Okay. Yeah, the problem of suffering. If God exists, why is there evil and suffering in the world, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, that's something we're going to be talking about. In fact, I think that's what we're set to cover next week, actually. We're going to be talking about that very question. Any other, anyone else want to share conversations they've had with atheists or agnostics, the reasons that they've given you as to why they do not have faith in God? All right. The time has come for us as Christians to become more responsible when it comes to our faith. We need to fortify our minds. We need to especially fortify the minds of our children with the kind of evidence that can withstand these attacks of unbelief that are coming our way, because since we are living in a society in which there are more and more unbelievers, then our own belief, our own faith will be challenged more and more, and not only ours, but our children's as well. So we must know not only what we believe, we also especially must know why we believe it. And it might seem like this is new, but in reality, the problem of unbelief is really nothing new. I cited Exodus chapter 5, verses 1 and 2 on your screens. That was more than 3,000 years ago. In that passage, Pharaoh asked Moses, who is God? Who is Jehovah God? And why should I, as Pharaoh, listen to him? And you'll read that Pharaoh, he said that he did not know God. And today, there are thousands of people who say the exact same thing that Pharaoh did, and they might even say it proudly. Now,
John, do you think there's something? Do you think there's something significantly different about the pagan world that the first century Christians faced, as opposed to the world that we, is it that much different than the multi-theistic gods that were created by man, as opposed to just having a kind of a suspicious belief in this whether there is a God at all?
worldwide, if you look at it from a global scale, no, because if you go outside of Western culture, go into the Eastern culture of the 20th century and even 21st century. Well, I'll just give you an example. It was World War II was what, 70 years ago? Not that long ago. The Japanese, there was a sizable portion of them that were literally worshiping their emperor Hirohito as a god. That's not that much different than what the Egyptians were doing with Pharaoh. Now, it might seem uh, like there is difference for what we personally can observe, because we don't see a lot of that polytheism that was pushed in what we read about paganism. We see a little bit of it. We might not know that much about it. If you study like Buddhism and some of those other Eastern religions, then you might see, well, actually, yeah, now that I see this, there is more of that. Mormonism, believe it or not, Mormonism, if you get really deep into what they believe, they're polytheistic. They believe in many gods. They believe that we become gods as a sense. But it's not as easy for us to observe where we are in Western culture today, but it is there. In fact, there are some people that see hints of it in the big push for climate change, climate control right now. The way that some people talk about it, not a lot of people based on my observation, but some people, they talk about it as they talk about the planet as a deity. We are offending the planet. We are hurting the planet. The planet is going to get even with us. Some will probably use that language, and they're just saying it. They don't mean anything religious by it. There are a few, though, that would be taking that as an actual deity. So I'd say that we see a little bit of it in Western culture. There's probably more that exists than we are aware of, and there's definitely more. It's definitely more prevalent in Eastern culture, based on what I've seen. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. I see a couple of people who are wanting to join here. All right, hold on one second. All right, we're gonna get Clay in here. All right. Hey, Clay.
Clay.
And well, the other person left. So okay. Let me pull back up the screen. Good to see you. Good to see you, Clay. All right. Let me ask you this. How do some who are unbelievers, how do they look at their own unbelief? For those of you who have had interactions with unbelievers, how do they come across as how they view their own atheism or their own agnosticism? Any thoughts?
Well, they're of the opinion that their beliefs are based on more reason than ours, so they're smarter than we are.
Right. With some, and this is very true with some, um, their lack of faith is a mark of intellectual sophistication. Um, as Dunn said, faith ought to be classified as nothing more than superstition. Any other views of how unbelievers view their own unbelief? Do they look at it in any other different ways? I would say that some others might not approach that particular extreme, although I do think that that extreme is growing more. But I do think that there are some who feel that faith, religious faith, is at least to a certain degree unprovable. That you really, there's no way you Christians can prove that everything you believe is really true. There's no way you can prove that. And that, as we're going to see in this class, that's a wrong assumption. God does exist, and he hasn't asked us to gamble our eternity on a bunch of assertions that we can't prove. There is a lot of evidence out there to demonstrate not only the existence of God, but as the Bible says in Hebrews 11, verse 6, he rewards those who diligently seek him. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of unbelievers. Unbelievers come in different varieties. There are atheists, and the word atheist, as you can see on the screen, it comes from which means not, and theos, which means God. Atheist, not God. And of course, they say there is no God. They have no belief whatsoever. There are skeptics that have doubt. They say, well, I doubt God exists. They're not as brazen as atheists, but they simply doubt the existence of a supreme being. And you also have agnostics. Agnostics argue that there isn't enough evidence to establish a reasonable case that God exists. And so what they conclude is that you just simply cannot know for sure either way whether God exists. And then you have deists. Now, deists say that God does exist. There is a God, he does exist, but he really is not interested in us. He doesn't really care about us. He has no contact with us. And so to deists, the scriptures, the Bible, is basically nothing but a bunch of myths. And to worship God, to pray to God, that would be meaningless to the deist because God doesn't care about us. He's not reaching out to us. So praying to him is a waste of time. Now, each one of these philosophies is wrong, and it will cost people their souls. And whether you're an atheist or a skeptic or an agnostic or a deist, then what you are doing is forcing the evidence of God's existence from your minds. Romans 1, verse 28, Paul talks about it. He says, they did not see fit to acknowledge God. They did not see fit to acknowledge God. In other words, they chose to not believe. And the reason I'm saying that they chose that is because what we're going to see is that unbelief is not actually natural. Unbelief, what we're going to see is that unbelief forces reason to take a back seat in your mind.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
John, just for a second. Now, Hebrews 11, though, isn't part of faith the fact that we can't know everything scientifically or with empirical evidence? Isn't that part of what our faith is based on?
I think I see what you're saying. It's the Hebrews 11 verse 1, the conviction of things not seen, right? Is that what you're alluding to?
Right.
Right. Well, what we're going to see is later on in this class is that, yeah, we might not be able to know something because of what we see. We do know some things because of what we see, right? There are many things that we do have not only a belief in, but a conviction in that we don't personally see, but because we have seen the evidence that points to that conclusion. And so does that go along with what you're talking about?
Well, I just think that, Hebrews 11 just tells us that, we have to just take some things on faith. If everything was absolutely provable and there was nothing, then there is no leap of faith. So there are certain things I believe that are intended not for us not to be able to completely know. Otherwise, they're part of what we believe is or a big part of what is not necessarily on faith. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think what we're talking about in this class would kind of go along the lines of the Bible passage that talks about how, in Romans 1, his invisible attributes are clearly seen through the evidence of what was made. His invisible attributes, I mean, we don't see him, but we can be confident in the question of his existence because
well, that's part of the dichotomy. People want absolute proof of what we believe, but the basis of faith is we'll never completely we'll never get that absolute proof of everything that we believe.
Yeah, and one of the things we're going to look at in this class is that extremely high standard that you said that some people have, they themselves cannot meet that in things outside of religion.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
And so we opened up the class by talking about reason. Well, using reasonable standards, we can know some of the things that we are talking about. Now, does that mean that there are other things that we do not know? Other things that when pressed upon, we'll have to say, I really don't know. I just, based on the evidence of what I do know about God, I will take this matter on faith because I don't have the evidence for this. Yeah, there are. But in talking about the things that in this class, the existence of God, the inspiration of the scriptures, the standards that people would use to verify other things in life are the same standards we can use to verify this as well. The good question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions? Go over to Acts 17, if you would, and someone read from me verse 28. Acts 17, verse 28.
For in him we live and move and have our being, even as some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed of his offspring.
All right, so if God is the basis for all of existence, and if he is the one in whom we live and move and have our very being, then it's only reasonable to conclude that mankind would have a basic need to believe in God. And if you study studies throughout history, including studies that have taken place in the modern day, that reveals that that is indeed the case. Mankind, generally speaking, has a basic need to believe in something. Man has always been curious about the divine, in all of the divine. We, generally speaking, we have an urge to believe in something higher than us. The quote that I have on the screen, this scholar, Murdo MacDonald, in his book, The Need to Believe, he put it this way, that man has always possessed an ineradicable sense of the divine, rest on evidence, which in its cumulative effect is simply overwhelming. The records and relics of the past, the researches of anthropologists into the beliefs and customs of primitive people, all testify to the universality of this urge. But the question that I have is, if there is a need that so many of us have deep down to believe in something, then why do people turn to atheism? If atheism is not normal, then why do some become unbelievers? Any thoughts on that? Why do people turn to atheism?
think two reasons. One, because they're hurt or upset in their own lives, and they lash out like a like a disappointed or frustrated child, and they want to point the finger at God for their problems. And the other reason that I think is to escape accountability for their lifestyles.
Okay. Now that first reason that you gave, that kind of points back to what you were talking about in the conversation you've had with unbelievers, that they say if there is a God, then why does he allow evil and suffering in the world, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and the second reason, could you repeat the second reason again?
The second reason, I believe, is that many of them turn to atheism to escape accountability to something higher than themselves in order to have no need to make an excuse for their lifestyle and choices.
Okay. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a second. Any other reasons that anyone has in mind?
Well, I have a reason. I think it's because the loss of a family member. The reason I say that is because this lady lost her grandbaby. Now, before she lost the grandbaby, and the baby was doing good, but it was in the hospital, she asked me to pray for the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when the baby died, she told me she didn't believe in God. She didn't believe in heaven and hell. And I asked her why, but she couldn't give me a reason. So I feel like that she turned to atheist because she lost her grandbaby.
So that also would go back to the problem of suffering. You know, if God exists, then why did I lose my grandbaby? Why did this terrible thing that caused me so much pain happen? Yeah. Right? And that is true. A lot of people have that reason.
But she had lost, it was 3 prior to that. Every time the baby would get a few months old or a week or 2 old, the baby died. And so she just gave up on God because she felt like that he was the cause of her baby dying.
Wow. That's a horrible, horrible situation. It really is. Any other thoughts that anyone wants to share? Why do people turn to atheism? I'll share a few with you that have come up in my observation. Number one, I think that the seeds of atheism can be planted early in life. I think that one of the most dangerous contributions a parent can make towards the spiritual delinquency of their child is a failure to instill within them a wholesome respect for authority. Like, for example, if the parent neglects to set the proper example as an authority figure, or maybe they discipline their child without love, then I think it's likely that the child will end up rejecting the parent as a figure of authority in his life. And ultimately, that child might transfer that rejection of authority from the parent to rejection of all authority. He may come to disdain all authority, and that would include the supreme authority, which is God. And that is why we're not going to read Proverbs 1 through 9 out loud. But one of the things we'll see is that this is one of the reasons why God told us to get wisdom. And part of wisdom has to do with fearing and respecting him and obeying our parents, as this verse brings out. There's a doctor who wrote, "I believe that much atheism has the ground prepared for it in the disillusionment with the parent which has arisen in the child. Disbelief in life, skepticism about humanity, the denial of God, all sink their roots in the soil of emotion long before exposure to courses in philosophy and science. Life has scarred such people early and has made them unwilling to believe either in man or in God. Any thoughts on that?
I think if children don't, like you said, learn to respect authority, when they become older, they think they are their own authority, and they like the idea of being their own God, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it goes back to exactly what Jake said. It allows them to escape any responsibility for their lifestyle because they get to be their own authority as opposed to having to be accountable to a higher authority, whatever that is.
Very true. Good point. Here's another reason. Inordinate pride, excessive pride can bring about atheism. And what I'm talking about is the kind of pride that sees man as his own God, as Clay brought out. And if man is his own God, then that means he's not going to submit to anyone else, kind of going along with what Jake was bringing out. One of the more famous evolutionists of recent times, George Gaylord Simpson, he wrote in his book, Life of the Past, that man is his own master. He can and must decide his own destiny. Now, some of you might have heard of Simpson. Probably, if I had to guess, maybe you've heard of Friedrich Nietzsche. Has that name popped up? Have you ever heard that, seen that around? Well, Nietzsche was the atheistic philosopher who made a very, very large impact on Adolf Hitler. And Nietzsche once said, if there were gods, how could I endure it to be no God? If there were gods, how could I endure it to be no God? That's a pretty bold statement, isn't it? And I think what we see here is this is what Paul was talking about in Romans. If you could someone read a passage for me? Romans 1 verses 21 through 23. Romans 1 verses 21 through 23. If someone could read that.
Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things.
And what you're seeing here is pride. Paul's talking about pride here. Professing to be wise, they became fools. And so this type of inordinate pride is also a reason for atheism. I think Jake put it very well. I want to do what I want to do. This next reason also kind of goes along with what Jake said as well. Let me pull it back up.
John, you brought up Friedrich Nietzsche, and he's a nihilist, and basically, he believed life was meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you can find yourself either philosophically or in such a mental state of hopelessness that that the idea that there's a larger being out there with control is just beyond what you can comprehend, depending on where your mental state or whether your philosophical state is.
Let me tell you something. You are exactly right in that the series of classes on apologetics that I've been taking, we just finished a class on philosophy. And number one, after I finished that class, I went and I said to Beth, I now realize just how dumb I really am. There is a lot. That is one of the deepest classes I've ever had, and it made me realize just how much more I have to learn. But we did talk about Nietzsche. We talked about nihilism, and you're exactly right. That is the end of the road logically to someone with that mindset. It's sad. It really is. But
even sadder is the person that is just so mentally or depressed or downtrodden that they can't see hope enough to believe in a God.
yes, very true. And I think that's one of the reasons why we as Christians, when we are sharing our faith with others, when we're sharing the good news of Jesus with others, we need to present it as good news. You know, we need to present it as a message of hope, that there is hope, that life does have meaning, and you can find it in Christ, and here's how. When we share our religion with others, the world either rightly or wrongly has the stereotypical view of Christianity as basically a religion of limitations. And we're about to talk about that a lot of people do not want to have moral, ethical limitations, and that's what leads them to reject Christianity. But there are some for whom that is not necessarily an obstacle, maybe because of these reasons, and they're looking for hope. Some people are looking for hope and looking for meaning, and if we can show them that hope in Jesus and be ready to defend in a loving, respectful way the veracity of our faith, I think that we can really change people's lives, and it can be a good thing. We can really turn things around for people, and it'll be a blessing to them. So let me bring up a third reason here.
John, do you think people see us, I guess, from different religious backgrounds arguing amongst ourselves and disagreeing on so much, and that causes them to just believe there can't be a God because we're not all believing the same thing?
I think that is part of it, yes. And Jesus mentioned it in his prayer in John 17, verses 20 through 23, when he prayed that his followers would all be one, even as I am in you and you are in me. What was the reason that he gave? He says, so that the world may know that you sent me. Division that is open and out there can turn people away. There have been reports of how the religion of Islam is getting a lot of converts in the prison system. A lot of convicts are converted to Islam in prison. It's been this way for about a generation now. There are some reports of one of the things that they are saying when they're converting these people to Islam is they point to Christianity and they say, well, you don't want to believe in Christianity. I mean, they can't agree amongst themselves what to believe. And of course, I mean, if you do a deep study of Islam, you'll see that they have the same problem. But that is an argument that is used to sway people's minds. And that's also an argument that is used among atheists as well. So, the answer to your question is definitely. I don't think it's the only reason, but I think it's up there. So here's another reason why people turn to atheism. Again, going back to what Jake says, to be free of moral responsibility. Aldous Huxley, also well-known atheist in recent times, he wrote an article titled Confessions of a Professed Atheist, and he argued that belief in God and viewing the world as having meaning were hindrances to, quote, sexual freedom, unquote. And then in the 1960s, there was another famous atheist philosopher from France, Jean-Paul Sartre, and he wrote, everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist. And this is why God said the following about atheists in Psalm 14, verse 1. Now, usually we only quote the first part of Psalm 14:1. It says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. But the rest of the verse says, they are corrupt, they do abominable deeds, there is none who does good. That is one reason why people turn to atheism, is because they don't want to have any sort of moral responsibility. We've already touched in Romans. We've read several passages out of Romans chapter 1. But if you were to go all the way to the end of that chapter, he lists a bunch of sins, many of which are quite immoral in nature, and he ties them all back to those who rejected the knowledge and the belief of God. Another reason why people turn to atheism is because sometimes they do so because their faith in someone who professes to be a devout believer in God has been shattered. They see Christians stumble and falter and sin. Clay, you brought up that they see division. And even if that Christian repents, there will be some who will use it as an excuse to not believe in God. And this is certainly made easier when they say people who call themselves believers in God and they sin in unrepentant ways, they act in ways that blatantly contradict the Bible. That turns a lot of people off to the Christian religion as well. Proverbs 25, verse 19 says, "Confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a broken tooth and a foot out of joint." The psalmist said in Psalm 118, verse 8, "It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man." We should not blame God for the blunders and mistakes of man, but that is what some people do. Satan does use our own shortcomings, especially if they are unrepentant shortcomings. He uses them as weapons, as stumbling blocks that he puts in the path of many people around us. And that is why, as Christians, let your light shine. Let people see your good works, not out of a proud sense, but rather be the example that you should be. It doesn't require perfection, of course, but it does require. You have no idea the power your influence can have when you are a humble, faithful, obedient, and penitent Christian. It sends a very good message to those who have open hearts. Any thoughts on that?
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, and kind of unrelated note, what does the CF before First Peter mean?
Oh, that's just some grammatical term that basically means here are other passages of scripture that kind of go along with the main point of these first two scriptures. That's what that means.
Thank you.
No problem. If you were to ask me what does the C and what does the F mean, I mean, what I would do is say I used to know that, but that's why we have Google. So,
Same here.
yeah. Any other thoughts? Any other questions? The last point I want to bring up in tonight's discussion is the proposal that atheism itself is its own system of belief, its own faith, that it is its own religion. And that kind of goes against what a lot of atheists will think about themselves, because a lot of atheists will say, well, I have a totally scientific and rational outlook on life. I deal in facts, and you Christians, you deal in faith. And that's not really true, because there are many things that one must believe, and without any kind of reasonable evidence, in order to subscribe to atheism. And I want to share a few of them with you. To be an atheist starting out, you must believe that God does not exist. You could not logically say, just think about this for a second. You could not logically say, I know that there is no God, because then you would have to know everything. So if the atheist admits that there is anything that he does not know, it might just be the fact that God exists. Here's something else to keep in mind. The atheist must either believe that matter is eternal, and the evidence is against this, or he must believe that matter created itself. And those two beliefs, and you'll notice I'm stressing belief, the word belief there. But these two beliefs contradict two fundamental laws of science, the first and second laws of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics indicates that matter cannot create itself. The second law of thermodynamics suggests that matter is not eternal. We're going to get further into that later on in this class. But that's something else that the atheist must have faith in. Atheists must also believe that life was spontaneously generated. But that is contrary to another proven law of science, the law of biogenesis, which says that life comes only from life and that of its own kind. And we're going to talk more about that in this class too. Atheists must also believe that order and design in nature are the results of accidents, basically. Accidents that had nothing to do with intelligent design. This is where the Big Bang Theory comes in. And then atheists also must believe that the non-conscious evolved from the conscious, and that the non-moral evolved from the moral. Especially that last part. We're going to talk more about morality in future discussions, but I mean, that is a very good question to ask the atheist. Where did morality come from? Where did we get it? Did we get it from the animals? Well, let's talk about that. But let's assume that that's correct. Where did they get it from? If we can actually observe it in them. So these are questions that, if you know how to, if you think them through, and if you can get the atheist to think them through, then it can have a powerful impact on those who are willing to think through the evidence. What we're seeing on the screen, though, is what atheism would have you believe, which is the notion that atheism operates solely on fact, and it has nothing to do with faith. Faith is for religion. It's not for atheism. Atheism deals with facts, not faith. Well, that's not true, because anyone who takes the time and effort to investigate this will clearly see that. Any thoughts on what we see on the screen? In closing, I want to bring out something that Dunn talked about when we were talking about Nietzsche a few minutes ago. Paul was talking about the death of Christians, and he said, Christians who are grieving over your fellow Christians who have passed away, I don't want you to grieve as others do who have no hope. That is what unbelief brings, basically. It brings utter despair. It brings nothing but sorrow for those who have no hope beyond this life, no hope beyond this earthly existence. When I've observed the atheist in my own life, and I've talked with them and gotten into deep studies or deep discussions with them, I've seen it many, many times. A lot of atheists, a lot of agnostics and skeptics, deists, in fact, there are studies that have been shown to prove this, that they are frequently prone to periods of agonizing depression. Back in the 1700s, the guy you see on the screen here, Voltaire, he was the leading voice of French atheism. Voltaire probably did more to destroy faith in the Bible more than any other person in the past 500 years. But at the end of his life, he is on record as saying, "I wish I had never been born." How many of you have heard of Marie Curie? Any of that name sound familiar? Marie Curie?
Yeah.
Well, she was an atheist, and here we have her daughter on record talking about when Marie Curie was pregnant with their second child. I mean, here you have Marie Curie. She's a two-time winner of the Nobel Prize. She's the one who discovered radium, and she used to be Catholic. She was a Roman Catholic turned atheist. Her daughter writes a biography of her, and in the biography, there's a lot of evidence that she did not enjoy that much peace of mind. In the year 1904, she's pregnant with their second child, and this is what her daughter wrote about this period of her life. It seemed that she no longer loved anything, neither science nor life, and not even the child which was about to be born. She cried out, "Why am I bringing this creature into the world? Existence is too barren." There, the atheist Robert Ingersoll, creator of the popular lecture "The Mistake of Moses," he once wrote, "I am afraid of the land of the shadows. The dim beyond is filled with frightful shapes or appears perfectly empty, which is still more frightful." British agnostic Bertrand Russell, this is the last one, he declared, "The life of man is a long march through the night, surrounded by invisible foes, tortured by weariness and pain, towards a goal that few can hope to reach and where none may tarry long." All of these statements are, they're sad. They're filled with sorrow. They're statements of people that do not have hope. And I think it would be so much better for us to live the life of obedient faith in God as a Christian, so that when death does approach, we can face it with courage and peace like Paul did. As Paul said, "For me to live is Christ and to die is gain. And if I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me. Yet which I shall choose, I cannot tell. I am hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better." Paul, he found meaning and purpose and joy in this life, and he had something to look forward to in the next. That's what Christianity offers. And I think that that should be a big part of the message of the gospel that we share with the unbelievers. When we have faith in God, we have peace. Any thoughts before we close out? Questions? How did this this Zoom venue work for y'all? This is the first time I've ever actually tried teaching a class on this, so I apologize if there's been any problems or hiccups. I take full blame for that. But does this seem like something good? Did it work out for y'all?
Yeah, did fine.
All right.
Yes.
Let me go ahead and get this down. All right, then. Well, we're going to continue this next week, and same time, Monday night, 7 o'clock, 7 to 8. And what you all got from me, where you have the link that you copy and paste, and you have the meeting number, the meeting ID number, that will be the same thing that you use to get back on next week. That's how I've set it up. So I will try to start the meeting about 10 minutes ahead of time, and you all just log on when you can. I'll let you in. I have recorded this, and so I'm going to see if I can if you want to go back and look at it again or share it with others. I'm going to see what I have to do to be able to accomplish that. So you'll be hearing from me on that.
John, there is a button that you can push where you don't have to let people in, that they'll just automatically, when they log in, will automatically be added to the meeting.
Okay.
And as the host, you can do that where you don't have to add them. They don't go in a waiting room. They'll automatically get on.
All right, I'll change that, because I'm just now looking down at my phone and I see that I have a text from my wife where she's been in the waiting room for a while, and I never did even see that. So I'm just going to let you all know this is the last time you all will ever see me.
Hey, John, you can also, if you've got email addresses, there's a link on it where you can email everybody the link, and it's a live link on email, and it makes it a little bit easier to access Zoom.
Okay, tell you what, I'm going to get back into the mechanics of this, and I'll try to find where you can set up that email link. If you all want that email link sent to you, email me at calhounchurchofchrist@gmail.com. Okay. calhounchurchchrist@gmail.com. That way I'll have your emails, and when I find out how to do that, I will send that out to you and to anyone else who wants to join. So,
Or make sure you email it to Beth first.
oh yes, yeah.
Bye, John.
I'm upstairs right now. I'm going to lock the door.
Have a good night.
See you later.
Have a good night.
See ya.